Retrieval practice. It's a term you've probably heard a million times, right? It's all over school development plans, it's the buzzword and staff meetings. But what does it really mean to use it well? It's one of the most powerful evidence-backed strategies we have, but it's also so easy to get wrong. So, let's get into it. Let's go beyond the buzzwords and figure this out. And for this explainer, we're leaning heavily on the fantastic work of evidence-based education. They've done such a great job breaking down the myths, the mutations, and the mistakes that can pop up when we try to put this powerful idea into practice in a real classroom. Here it is, the question that probably keeps every single one of us up at night. You know the feeling. You deliver this amazing lesson, the kids are buzzing, they totally seem to get it, and then a week later, poof, it's like it never happened. But listen, this isn't a failure on your part, or on theirs. It's just how our brains are wired. The good news is there's a way to work with that wiring, not against it. So, to figure out how to make learning stick, we first got to understand the basics of how we learn, and more importantly, why we forget. It really comes down to a simple 3-step process. And for a long time, we've been putting way too much focus on just the first 2 steps. Okay, so look at this model. Most of our effort as teachers naturally goes into encoding and storage, right? We work so hard to get the information in, and then we just cross our fingers and hope it stays there. But what the science is showing us loud and clear is that the real magic happens in step 3, retrieval, getting it out. It isn't just a way to check what they know. The actual process of pulling information out of the brain is what strengthens it for the future. It's an active part of learning itself. So if forgetting is the problem we're all trying to solve, then retrieval is the answer. And this isn't some newfangled idea. It is a deeply researched, incredibly effective strategy for fighting that natural forgetting process and for building knowledge that actually lasts. And here's the absolute most important idea to wrap your head around. Retrieval practice is not a test. I'll say it again, it's not a test. It's not about a grade, it's a learning strategy. Every single time a student pulls a memory out, that memory path in their brain gets a little stronger, a little clearer. Think of it like you're creating a well-worn path through a forest. The more you walk it, the easier it is to find next time. And look, the science on this is just unbelievably clear. This quote says it all. It's one of the most secure findings we have. This is not a fad, it's a fundamental principle of how humans learn. When you do it right, it just plain works. The challenge, of course, is doing it right. Which brings us to a really critical point. Because just like any powerful tool, retrieval practice can be misused. When we lose sight of the core principles behind it, our best intentions can actually lead to practices that are, well, not very effective, or maybe even worse. They can be counterproductive. I just love this term, a lethal mutation. It's from Ed Hartle, and it perfectly captures what happens when we copy the surface-level activity of a strategy without really getting the deep principles that make it work. And with retrieval practice, unfortunately, these lethal mutations are all too common. All right, here's the biggest myth of them all. The very second, you attach a grade or a score to a retrieval task, you completely change its purpose. It stops being about practice and starts being about performance. It adds stress, and when the brain is stressed out, it's not thinking about complex recall, it's thinking about survival. The goal has to be low stakes, or even no stakes, to create the best possible conditions for building memory. Now, this one's a little more nuanced. Yeah, making students recall information from scratch with 0 prompts, that's called free recall, is super powerful because, well, it's hard. But if the challenge is so hard that students just can't recall anything, then guess what? No learning is happening. It's just frustrating. So for younger kids or for really complex new topics, giving them some cues or prompts is a much smarter way to make sure they can get started and feel some success. A lot of schools have adopted the Do Now quiz at the start of every lesson. And that's a fantastic routine, don't get me wrong, but it shouldn't be a straitjacket. I mean, think about a practical lesson, like cooking, where students need to get their hands dirty right away. Or a PE class. You can do the retrieval later, maybe when the food's in the oven or during a water break. The principle is about doing it regularly, not about being rigid with your timing. This one. This one is probably the most common and honestly the most damaging mutation of them all. If students can just look up the answer in their notes, they're not retrieving anything. They're just finding information. The learning, the magic, happens in that moment of struggle. That little bit of mental effort is what tells the brain, hey, this is important, let's strengthen this connection. Letting students peek at their notes completely removes that struggle, and with it, you lose most of the benefit. So,
We've busted the myths, we've spotted the mutations. How do we actually put this all together and make retrieval practice a genuinely effective part of our teaching? Well, it really comes down to avoiding a few common traps and sticking to some clear, simple principles.
These three mistakes right here can totally sink your efforts. First, if you're just doing hands up and only a few kids are answering, then only those few kids are really doing the retrieval work. Second, if you don't provide feedback, students might just be practicing their mistakes over and over, making those wrong answers stronger. And finally, if it's way too easy or impossibly hard, you miss that sweet spot, that desirable difficulty where the real memory building happens.
Okay, this slide is basically your cheat sheet. Let me just highlight a couple of game changers here. Look at that first point. Instead of hands up, which gets maybe one student thinking, think about simple tools like mini whiteboards that make every student think. Total game changer. And then look at the last one. Don't just ask the question and move on. You have to build in time for feedback so kids can see what they got right, fix their errors, and really close those knowledge gaps. And, this is why it all matters so much. Understanding a strategy like retrieval practice isn't just about adding another activity to your lesson plan. It's about developing a much deeper, more sophisticated understanding of how your students' brains actually work. And that knowledge, that's what takes good teaching and makes it truly great teaching. So, to wrap this all up, let's make it super practical. Don't feel like you have to go in and change everything all at once. Just think about this. Based on what we've talked about, what is one small, manageable change you can make tomorrow? Maybe it's just swapping hands up for mini whiteboards. Or maybe it's just planning for 2 extra minutes after your starter so you can give proper feedback. Because that one small change, that's how you start making this powerful science really work for your students.